Misha here, and not too long ago I did a 3-part series looking at the TIE fighter, the Sienar Systems line twin ion engine series. And the reason I did it is because in the Jazzwares Micro Galaxy Squadron, they released the TIE Defender. And at that time, I kind of felt like we had all of them, and it was a good time to kind of do an overview series. We had the regular TIE fighter, the TIE LN, the Interceptor, the Bomber, of course Vader's Advanced X1, and several of the newer ones like the Striker too. And then, well, they went and messed me up by, in very quick succession, releasing the Inquisitoriuses TIE Advance V1. This is a cool design. I'm aware of it thanks to the old titanium black series. It's a small little ship, but it's supposed to be. So that was pretty cool. And then they brought out something that we haven't seen since the 1990s in the old TIE Fighter X-Wing games, and well, sort of, because it appeared in Andor. And obviously, me not being able to see the show, I didn't know how close it was to the original. But I think, just as they've visually updated the TIE Defender a bit, and they have here with the TIE Advance prototype or TIE Avenger, I like the visual updates they've done. You know, the originals were made for early 3D polygons, so a little bit different. Anyway, I've got a little time, so I thought we would, talk about the evolution of the TIE. I'm not going to bring them all out again. I think I'm going to kind of drill down on the Sienar experiments, where this all began, and then kind of make this an updated version of the original episode I did looking at the TIE Advanced series, the hyperdrive equipped versions, if you will. And if you're going to do that, you have to start at, well, what was the beginning. And actually, this directly connects to both the V1 and the Avenger. From episode 1 and 2, Phantom Menace, you might think of it as Darth Maul's ship. You might think of it as the Scimitar, which was its individual name. But this was a production craft, at least a modified version of. This started off as a Star Courier, and the specific variant was known as the Sith Infiltrator, or just the Infiltrator. And it's really where Sienar Systems got their start with the whole twin ion engines and the bubble. Well, this is more than a canopy here. It's actually quite a large vessel in universe. Even though the Micro Squadron is nominally 172 scale, when you have a larger ship like this, it's over 26 meters long. In reality, not reality. So you can't really do that cost effectively, packaging effectively, and have it to scale. But the nod is there, and it's probably closer to scale than a lot of previous ones like the old Micro machines. Anyway, it's still pretty neat and a good representation. What do you think? What do you think of the design? And this is Sith through and through. In fact, it was designed by a Sith in secret, Darth Tenebrous, in the 40s BBY. And that would connect it to Darth Plagueis, which was Sidious's master. And then in 32 BBY, it would actually be Plagueis who would encourage Sidious to gift this, loan this to Maul for his operations. Now, the original courier was meant for high-end diplomatic missions. It was it could transport about 2.5 tons of cargo and passengers up to 6 plus 1 pilot. It had a hyperdrive rating of a Class 2 with a Class 12 backup, which was actually very fast for a smaller craft in that era. It had shielding, of course life support, and it had enough provisions for up to a month. So pretty long range missions. And at first, like a lot of Republic era craft, it looks unarmed, but that's deceptive. It had concealed weapons, not to mention, at least the infiltrator had a cloak, thanks to special crystals, all that good stuff. And it was reasonably fast in an atmosphere, about 1150 kph, and about 100 megalights in space, which is pretty fast, honestly. I don't know what the turning would have been, but it packed a lot into a package for its day and time. So, yeah, where did this begin as far as the TIE series? Well, it had twin ion engines for sublight propulsion in the back. It also has these panels. Now the outsides are plated, armored, but the insides do act as solar collectors or radiators, or both. So it still had a reactor core and energy core, but they were there to supplement. Hey, even the Sith were green. This is what you don't know about Emperor Palpatine. He was actually a big proponent of green energy. And of course, this would not operate from a larger ship. It would operate from the ground, from stations, what have you. And so, from the beginning, it had a landing mode. First off, you'd fold in your wings here, and I'm trying to be careful with these. They're very stiff. Yeah, I appreciate that they're not floppy, I really do, but kind of wish Jazzwares had made these a little, like ratcheted would have been kind of nice. So when I fold them, I try to put even pressure and not be too aggressive. Anyway, fold those in for landing mode. And then of course we have landing gear as well. Luckily, these aren't stiff. Some of the other Jazzwares are. Got a short one in the back. And let's see if I'm doing it the right direction. I think so. Yeah. Taller ones in the front here. And there you have it for operating on a planet. And this is actually a two-story affair, two-deck affair, because you do have a lower bay here that opens up. Now they had to make it a little short because of, again, reducing scale, but they did even give it a fold-out ramp to simulate landing. And again, this was a courier vehicle. I think it looks pretty neat. And you can open it up to get to the cabin. Normally, again, they would use the ramp and just go upstairs, but you have to make some compromises, and it does have the seats for the passengers. Luckily, with the Class 2 hyperdrive, unless it was a long journey, it wouldn't take all that long to get places, so the amenities are sparse, but they're there. A lot of the technology here would absolutely be carried over to the later Sienar designs during the Clone War and during the Empire. It also stores his blood-thin speeder in here. Normally it'd be in the lower bay, but for this it just stores it in a little trunk up here. No, sorry, it's a frunk. Is that what Elon calls it on that truck of his? Anywho, not to belabor the point, Rafe Sienar actually delivered and personally dealt with these, and we get to know Chancellor Palpatine in this era. And of course, Sienar Systems would provide lots of fighters and equipment for the Clone Wars, but I don't feel like going into all that today. I want to not make this hugely long. But it meant that they were a shoo-in for the contract to replace the V-Wing and the ETA-2 Interceptor, because the Empire was going for quantity over quality, it's often said. But also keep in mind, it's a literal galactic empire with thousands of Star Destroyers and then thousands, tens of thousands of other ships and a galaxy of thousands of systems. You kind of had to do quantity. I mean, to be fair, each Star Destroyer just had 72 TIE fighters on board. That's not a huge amount. That's fewer than on a World War II carrier, at least larger carriers. So, yeah, but when you have that many, it comes out. Anyway, already by 18 BBY, just a year, 18 months at most after the end of the Clone Wars, the prototype of the twin ion engine fighter, TIE fighter, was ready to go for testing. And by 14-15 BBY, within 3 or 4 years, it really had mostly replaced older vessels. Of course, it required special racks and ships. Now, it could land on a planet, on its wings, on its panels, but then you still got to get down, because this is kind of a big jump, because it's about 7 meters tall, 6 meters wide across. And it was it was kind of the AK-47 of starfighters. Simple, dependable, and it had a lot more going on than you might think. True, there was no internal life support. By the way, the ball reminds me of the Soyuz capsule. Or maybe Sputnik. Anyway, no life support, but no shields. But the twin ion engines were actually quite powerful and maneuverable and energy efficient. While it still had fuel cells on board, these solar panels, and by this point they're absolutely solar panels, generated at least enough power for some of the systems. And while it only had 2 laser cannons, LS-1s originally and later versions, they were actually quite rapid firing, quite powerful, high quality for its size, and the targeting systems, the computer systems on board, were actually very advanced for the day and time. But this was meant to be a line fighter. Great for workaday stuff, patrols, swarm tactics, but Sienar and the Empire knew that they would need more advanced, more specialized, more special forces type fighters. Sienar Systems had a lot of projects and programs, but probably the first to come to fruition and be ready for actual production was a simple upgrade of the original TIE, the TIE Interceptor, the TIE-N, the TIE-I, Squints as they were known. It's debatable when these actually were put into full mass production, but it seems like the original prototypes could have been ready as early as 14 BBY, as late as 10 BBY. They did go to a whole new style of wing with sensors, improvements in here. The ball canopy was slightly enlarged to allow for a better energy core and more avionics. And of course, better, faster twin ion engines. And that was the first thing about the Interceptor, was its increased speed. While in atmosphere, it was only slightly faster at about 1250 kph. In space, its megalights went up to 110. So about 10% more than the standard TIE and quite a bit more than a lot of previous ones. Agility, maneuverability was up. Also, it had a little bit better armor and protection. Still not shielded, still no life support, but it could take a couple more hits than a standard TIE. What really excelled though was its armament. Standard were 4 laser cannons, 1 on each wingtip. These were an improved version. The LS 9.3. And if range wasn't a deal, say during a defensive role, you could mount 2 more cannons on the ball for a total of 6. This would consume a lot of energy, but if it wasn't on a long-range patrol, it didn't really matter. It was cost-effective, easy to produce, and used a lot of the same stuff that the standard TIE did. But it was just the first step. It was always kind of intended maybe to fully replace the regular TIE, although that never came to fruition. And again, it doesn't seem like they really started cranking these out in large numbers until the rebellion, the Galactic Civil War, kicked off. Another early concept from Sienar that, again, had a prototype working just a few years later and was in mass production well before the Galactic Civil War was the TIE Striker here, officially known as the SKX-1. Now, this was never meant for just everywhere mass issue. It was a specialist craft, specifically for atmospheric and near-atmospheric operations, patrol, logistics, what have you. And while, again, its megalites in space were the same as the regular TIE, about 100, in an atmosphere, it was one of the very fastest at about 1500 kph, with good maneuverability, agility, and flexibility. Obviously, it could easily work from a ground base. It had 1 pilot, and then 1 secondary, could have been a bombardier, an observer, or sensor operator in the back. It was armed with 4 LS 9.3 cannons specialized for atmospheric operations, 2 wingtip, 2 body, and it also had a vertical chute for dropping thermal detonators, proton bombs, or canisters, what have you. Again, mostly specialized for patrol and whatnot. I should also mention that the TIE Interceptor was about 11 meters long, and these jobs were a little bit longer than that, 15, 16 meters, but very thin. This too did not have a hyperdrive or a lot of other stuff, but it does show specialization in the Empire, able to adapt somewhat. And that's a good place to jump into the TIE Advanced program. A very long-running program. The TIE Advanced, the goal was basically to take this, the space carrier, the Scimitar style, with all its features, shields, life support, most importantly hyperdrive, and shrink it down into something like a TIE fighter. And ultimately, the first version to actually be produced in any numbers was this here, the so-called TIE Advanced V1, made famous by the Inquisitorius, but not used exclusively by them. And this is a tiny ship, under 3.5 meters long, I guess you would say, and about 6.5, a little more wide, and very thin when compacted up like this. But of course, taking from the Scimitar there, it does have deployable wings. Now, the outer panels are armored, so they don't serve as solar collectors. The inner panels do have collecting services and also can work as radiators. But this also meant that it needed a internal energy core, basically a fuel cell, as it were, to supplement the needs of everything. That also gave it a limited endurance range of about 2 days operating on its own. But it could do a whole lot in that time. And if it seems a little too small for you, actually Sienar had done something similar during the Clone Wars. The specialized Jedi Interceptor, done for Yoda and presumably other short-statured people, maybe Ewoks? A Jedi Ewok would be cool. With its wings or radiators deployed, you can kind of see the resemblance. It has the ball canopy. And it does have an astromech because it could go into hyperspace, but it can only do so by use of an external ring. And only had 2 laser cannon. And I don't believe they made many of these during the Clone Wars, but it was there, and it is a starting point. But in a lot of ways, the V1 here is a more advanced and elegant design, and it does have the hyperdrive. It was miniaturizing the hyperdrive that took the TIE Advanced program well over a decade. It started in 18 BBY, and the first prototypes of these were not available until 5 BBY. Now, it wasn't the fastest hyperdrive in the galaxy, only about class 4.5, so that's it's pretty slow, but it's a hell of a lot faster than sublight speeds. Speaking of, this had about 105 megalights in space, so just a hair faster than a TIE fighter, and that's acceptable because it basically uses the same model of ion engine as regular TIE. But because of its size and more aerodynamic structure, and the fact that it did have a shielding system, in atmosphere it was actually capable of over 1500 kph, so more than an interceptor. One of the fastest and most maneuverable and hardest to hit because of its size. Had 1 crew, which did enjoy life support, at least basic measure, for 2 days, like I said. And that shield did help with the speed and atmosphere, and that's really its main use. The truth is, this was not a dogfighter, a long endurance. It had a little better armor than a standard TIE, but not by much, and its shielding, while technically there, could only take 1 or 2 laser blasts before it would fail or let something through. But it's important because it's really the first TIE to feature any kind of shielding, any kind of hyperdrive, any kind of life support. As far as its cannon, they were in between a regular TIE and something like an interceptor. They were LS 9.1s. So, again, not the most advanced at the time, but miniaturized. And it did have a miniature ordnance launcher in the middle, typically used to launch tracking beacons, drones, but it could launch miniaturized concussion missiles if required. So that's pretty important for the whole TIE series as well. These would be put into somewhat production. Yes, the Inquisitorius had a good number of these. We see several stolen by the rebels or destroyed, and they get replaced very quickly. We also see a few squadrons flying these before the Death Star event, and a few of them are around afterwards, but by that point priorities and times are kind of changing, and this is being kind of moved past. They're also used by Sienar Fleet Systems themselves to guard their factories and test facilities. For example, those on Planet 73. The V1, the first generation, was a very important step, but the next generation would be iconic and, frankly, with the series from the beginning. Often thought of as Darth Vader's starfighter, this is the TIE Advanced X1, and more than just Vader flew this, although, to be fair, his was slightly customized in the cockpit for his stature, let's say. And this is obviously a larger craft compared to the V1 because it takes everything and just it makes it more durable, better endurance, and what have you. Although, to be fair, it's not huge. It's about 9 meters long, so still shorter than an interceptor. And in a lot of ways, its speed and agility is about the same as a regular TIE. It's capable of about 105 megalights, and in an atmosphere, 1200, maybe 1250 speed at most. So the engines and whatnot aren't much better. The 2 laser cannons are LS 9.3s, so they take advantage of having more space to give it the more powerful cannon. From the V1 you go to the more powerful cannon of the Interceptor. It also has a larger ordnance launcher. It can actually fire full-sized weapons, although because of its size it has limited supply. It does have life support and is rated for up to 5 days on its own. With more resources in the back, it has a larger, more capable fuel cell, not to mention larger solar collectors and radiators. So you might be thinking, how is this really an improvement? Well, it comes in like with what I said about the V1. It is a quick strike craft or personal transport to get from point A to point B, but it can't really hang in a dogfight with multiple opponents for all that long. It just doesn't have energy reserves or defenses to do that. The X1 did. It had more armor plating, thicker hull armor, and just was overall larger. It also had a much stronger and more evenly distributed shield that could also be toggled front or back for additional power. So it could definitely take more hits, it could dish out a little better, and it could get there faster because it went from having the class 4.5 on the V1 to a class 4 hyperdrive. Not exponentially faster, but faster. And considering this was developed really right at the same time as the V1, maybe like 1 year behind, it's already showing marked improvement. We do know that by 4 BBY, Vader had his, which was a customized and kind of advanced prototype of the X1. We see him using it to hit the Rebel flagship, Phoenix, and destroy it. And he would continue to fly his personal fighter, of course, during the Battle of the Death Star, where it was about the only thing to survive, although it did take a strike from a regular TIE fighter. Piloted by actually this guy here. Vader's wingmen, Black Squadron, were in regular ties, so they had to wear the full suit. But even then, typically with the TIE V1 and X1, at the very least, the pilot would wear the life support helmet, both for targeting information and also just as an emergency measure. But of course, if it was a shorter mission, they typically just wear the whole flight suit. Also should point out that the only reason there were any TIEs out there during the Battle of the Death Star was Vader himself, because Tarkin did not feel it necessary to launch the station's fighters, so Vader launched his own personal squadron. It's almost as if they launched all of them, they probably wouldn't have been defeated. The V1 used some advanced targeting data and information delivery system piped directly to the displays in the helmet, not to mention standard TIE controls. The X1 improved that with a faster, better, more customizable, accurate targeting and sensor system. It was a concept, a prototype, so it did require kind of finagling once in a while. It wasn't as easy or intuitive of a craft to fly and operate because of all the extra systems and whatnot as a regular TIE, but that's why these were always meant for specialized elite squadrons. And so they would start flying them in limited numbers before the Death Star, and they would still appear after, although again it was never put into huge production. Pilots did like them. It was kind of an enviable post, and those who got them were proud of them. And they were still seen right after the Battle of Hoth at Empire Day, although their future would end up being cut short because of several events. But from the very beginning, we see that Sienar wasn't just making the disposable TIE, because these were pretty expensive. They cost over 2 times, approaching 3 times that of a standard lined fighter, with all the information and stuff that go into them. And of course, that miniaturized hyperdrive was still probably its single most advanced technology. since even the best Clone Wars ships of this size did not have internal hyperdrives. Not to mention, it's just a Star Wars classic, and every series of starfighters has to do the TIE Advanced X1. Well, except for some reason, the 1994 TIE Fighter game. I remember back then, it was a little odd that they did not have the X1 in that game. How about that transition, so we can talk about our next new series fighter in the Micro Galaxy Squadron. This is the TIE Advanced Prototype, as it was known, but we know it as the TIE Avenger. This is essentially an updated, modernized version of the TIE Avenger from that old video game. This is what was there instead of the TIE Advanced X1, with the double pointy wings and cutouts and all. It basically is the same, but stretched out in every which way, which is kind of how they do the modern look. To be fair, back then, yeah, low polygons and graphics, so it doesn't really bug me. And they've also made it into something a little more unique and distinctive, because to be fair, in the old video games, the TIE Avenger was kind of DOA. I mean, it was supposed to be the new great thing, but it got eclipsed very quickly by the TIE Defender in the game and was just kind of short-shrifted. So in some ways, I kind of see this as a way to vindicate the TIE Avenger over in Andor. Not to mention, it's just a neat model or toy or whatever. And I feel like they put a lot of effort into it. So that's why I wanted to do this here video. Plus, it kind of lines up very well with the V1 X1. It's all in that same series. And for BBY, this was Sienar Systems' next most advanced prototype. And not to recap the show, it's not really how I do here, but it definitely took inspiration from what had come before, and not just the X1 and the V1. The reason I brought the Striker out and the Interceptor is you can see a clear connection and lineage, especially because while this was absolutely meant to be a space fighter, it had more ground abilities. In fact, just to begin, it was one of the few TIEs that was designed to land on the surface of a planet or in a regular shuttle bay, quite frankly. And to make that happen, there are landing pads on the bottoms of the wings, of the foils, if you will, and it was designed to take off from that. And that is just really the beginning of where this is different. And when this was first announced, I thought it might be a little absurd with all the armament on board, including a turret. But I've warmed to it, and there's actually a real world equivalency of this so-called starfighter. The V1 could be said to be a light interceptor. The X1 is a space superiority starfighter. The Avenger could be classed as a multi-role or multi-purpose starfighter, or even an attack, as in ground attack, starfighter. Kind of like a Warthog, but actually even more like one of the aircraft from Cold War Enemy. The specs. It's about 13 meters long, so it's longer than the Interceptor, a little bit shorter than the Striker, definitely longer than the Advanced or V1, X1, either one. It has a much improved hyperdrive because it is larger. They're able to take advantage and further push it forward. This is a Class 2 hyperdrive, although propaganda would say it's a Class 1. It's a Class 2. So twice the speed of the X1, but still slower than a main cruiser. It does have life support. No surprise at this point, that's becoming a standard for the more advanced craft. And it's designed to operate for several days, 2 weeks or even 30 days at a pinch, away from a home base if needed. The shielding is much improved from the V1 and still stronger than the X1s. It has good armor. It has the armor plating of the V1 on the outer parts of the wings, meaning that it doesn't have quite as good a solar collection, so it has to have fuel cell, meaning it does need to refuel more often. And it has twin ion engines, but they're very large, very powerful in the back here. So much so that in an atmosphere, it's basically as fast as the V1, 1500 or more kph. And in space, it's at least 115, maybe 120 megalights. So it's faster than anything we've seen so far. Certainly in a straight line, but maneuverability seems to be quite good as well, because in space there's no resistance, so why not? But then we come to the weapons, the ordnance on board. To begin, we have 6 LS 9.3 cannons, 4 on the wingtips, 2 on the cockpit ball, so same as a fully loaded TIE interceptor. But then we have this turret on the side, which can point down, point to the rear, point up. I mean, if you put a turret under the chin, your firing arc could be very limited, so it's about as good as you can get. It definitely seems to be a heavier cannon. I don't think it's quite a turbo laser, although it could be a light turbo laser. And while it could definitely hit space targets, other starfighters or cruisers, in fact, it could probably do pretty good at strafing a cruiser, it also seems to me that it would be very good at targeting ground assets. And you could even have it sweep by as the fighter flew over. But lasers aren't just everything. As you can see, there are missiles mounted on the wings. You have a total of 12 full-size concussion missiles. These are great for anti-starfighter or even light cruisers, frigates. And for heavier, harder targets, either ground-based installations or larger capital ships, you have a total of 4 proton torpedoes. And what's interesting, instead of being in internal launchers like say on a Y-wing, these are just externally mounted. Not as elegant, but the good news is they could fire almost as many at once as they wanted. I mean, in theory, you could fire all the missiles at one go. Very World War I, World War II submarine style. But of course, once they're fired, and they're not protected. But then again, they're on the inside of the craft, so that helps with drag too, and that and the shielding. There are also a couple of pop-out light blaster cannon on the bottom for defense, kind of like what we see with the Millennium Falcon using. So I think there's a good bit of attack built in. It's almost a bomber. But it has one more feature inside. A regular TIE, you get into the cockpit from the top hatch. We see that on all of these, quite frankly. See if I can get this open. I just trimmed my fingernails, so it can be a little hard. Oh, helps if I have it on the right way, huh? Yeah, that's how you access it. Now, of course, the V1, when collapsed down, it's not too hard to find a ladder somewhere to get in there. Regular TIE might be a little more so. But how you access the canopy for this one is pretty unique for a TIE fighter. It actually has a boarding ramp in the rear here. It actually pulls out a bit and has its own built-in ladder, again because of its eye towards operating on the ground. And on top of that, it actually has real internal volume, real internal space, unlike every other TIE we've ever seen. It is a 2-compartment interior. You have the cockpit up front, and then you have a small compartment in the back, either for transporting cargo, supplies, or a handful of troops or engineers, technicians. How many? Hard to say, Not a huge amount, not a full squadron, which would be 10 to 12, but possibly you could cram in for short durations 4. At least a couple. And this kind of gets me to what I think this most resembles from the real world, because of all of its ground attack abilities, its turret, and ability to carry a small number of troops and land and take off. Can you guess? The Hind. I was going to bring one out, but mine are put up right now. Yeah, the Mi-24 Hind. It's like this. It has this level of armament. It can carry a small number of troops. And it's still very fast. In fact, it set helicopter speed records. So with that in mind and similar craft, I've kind of really come to like this. And I do like how they've updated the original design. Not that it was bad, but, you know, stretching it out. And you do have advanced sensors in the wings. And speaking of, as is pointed out in Andor, flying it, it has very advanced computer targeting systems. It's basically virtual reality, kind of holographic displays. One hand controls the weapons, one hand controls the flying. Although, since it does have room for another person in the back, I would suspect that if you had a flight engineer or gunner, kind of like on the Striker, he could take over weapons operations, especially striking ground targets with the ordnance, leaving the pilot to fly it. Because while it is a very high performance craft, fast, agile, a lot going on, it's a lot for one person without any droids helping them to, you know, take control of. Speaking of droids, whereas a droid can calculate jumping into hyperspace and the different vectors, when you don't have one on board, and this goes for Rebel craft, they don't have one too, like the A-Wing, jump coordinates have to be pre-programmed in, and most computers can only hold 5 or 10 jumps at most because they're rather large files called calculations. So that's just kind of one limitation of not having R2 around. But no, I think it's a pretty neat thing. Who's to say if the Empire mass-produced these and in what exact version, since this is a prototype, but, you know, Andor stole it, and that was it. Factory, or I should say Planet 73, the same place we saw the little V1s being used as defense craft, and probably the same place the X1 was designed by Vader 2 and all that. It's hard to say just how many of these were made, because very, very soon a new program would come in championed by Grand Admiral Thrawn. Both the V1 and Avenger seem to have been primarily designed, developed, and tested at Sienar's Planet 73. Now, while the next fighter still came from the whole Sienar Systems, it would be from maybe a different tech branch, different supervision branch at Lothal. Of course, the TIE Defender, the TIE D, a true space superiority fighter, light bomber, or long-range high-performance interceptor. This is the culmination of everything in the TIE Advance program. And take it off the stand here. No matter if you're talking the original or the modern canon, this is directly connected to Grand Admiral Thrawn, and originally did appear in the same 1994 video game as the original TIE Avenger. In the current timeline, progress was already being made by 3 BBY, and the first prototype was ready for its initial field test, field trial on a real mission by 2 BBY, meaning that this is still very much in development right around the same time as the Avenger and 4 BBY. And you can see it has a lot of elements very similar to the Avenger, including a very similar wing structure, and everything is just miniaturized. Now, it is not geared towards ground assault, ground attack, or even, frankly, ground or atmospheric operations, although it can work in an atmosphere. This is meant for space. But like I said, it could be a light bomber amongst many other things. And it was the best TIE fighter ever created. Speed-wise, it was 120 megalights. It had a Class 2 hyperdrive like the Avenger, but it's much smaller, or at least somewhat so, back here. Now, it did not have a large cockpit or canopy. That's true, not a big cabin. It's just enough room for the pilot there. It did have very strong shields. The armor was fine, but not outstanding, but the shields were very good, and it was very agile, very maneuverable. Its armament was also very respectable. It had 6 LS 9.3 cannon, of course in the tips, although sometimes the top 2 could be replaced in service by ion cannon, which is really one of the first times we see those available on a TIE, and that was in response to the growing rebellion, galactic civil war, because whereas lasers will destroy, ion cannons will disable. They were also very popular back in the Clone Wars because they did bad things to droids. In addition to that, you see that there are pairs of missiles in each wing. Typically, that could be 6 proton torpedoes or 8 concussion missiles. There was room for 3. And in addition, there could be up to 2 ordnance launchers under the canopy here, if and when needed. So it could be armed up pretty good, especially the so-called TIE Defender Elite. It could have a decent amount of ordnance on board for its light bomber role. It also had very sophisticated targeting systems, jamming systems. Even some could mount a tractor beam in this chin area for combat. Pilots really loved how these maneuvered. And honestly, the only 2 downsides were, one, it's a little bit more of a bulky silhouette. In the front, you know, sticking out everywhere. Now, to be fair, it's about 11 meters long. Maybe just a little more than an interceptor, but it's just, you know, bulkier. And 2, that does restrict the field of view a bit for the pilot, especially upwards. On the other hand, by this point, they're expected to rely on their internal targeting systems and virtual displays in the helmets and whatnot. And there was also a third negative: cost. And this was more important to the bean counters. It would cost as much to make one of these as it would 5 regular TIE fighters. On the other hand, these were said to be at least 4 times as good. In fact, whereas a standard wing of TIEs was at full strength 16, a standard wing of Defenders was 4. And they could put a lot of hurt on something even with just 4 in a flight. Their first experimental mission in 2 BBY was almost a success. The fighter wasn't the fault, and so they were authorized for full production in 1 BBY, but they were directly competing for funding with the Death Star. Of course, Thrawn's idea was to make several thousand very good starfighters to be clearly superior, especially to the Rebel fighters of that day. This is pre-B-Wing and all that stuff, and just wipe them out. Of course, with the hyperdrive on board, they could zip in and zip out, do longer patrols, and to make sure that the pilots could fully take advantage of the assets, because like with the Avenger over there, it wasn't the easiest to fly. They would only be taken from seasoned TIE Interceptor pilots that had at least 20 combat missions under their belt. So it was definitely considered a promotion to get a TIE Defender. And they were underway to mass produce these at the Sienar Systems facility in Lothal when rebel terrorists would do major damage to the facility. And because of that, and because of the Death Star's imminent completion, the Defender program was put on hold indefinitely. However, they would end up making probably more of these than any of the other TIE Advanced on the table. We have no idea how many TIE Avengers they would make, but it looks like it was a pretty small number, especially because Andor stole the prototype, and maybe because needs were changing. They decided that a relatively large, if also powerful craft geared towards capital ship or ground attack wasn't the kind of fighter they would need for the Galactic Civil War. They would need something that could go against the rebel starfighters, which were at the time clearly superior to the standard TIE LN. And for just regular bombing missions, they still had plenty of TIE bombers, and as long as you escorted them, they could deliver quite a large, heavy payload. So this was a really neat step on the way, but a bit of a dead end. The TIE Advance V1 saw limited but regular heavy use by the Inquisitorius before the Death Star, but as the Inquisitorius themselves kind of went away, no more Jedi to hunt, and they were kind of lost to attrition, either from within or without, you started to see these disappear. A few squadrons would fly these before the first Battle of Death Star, but it seems like after that, their production would be over, and they would appear in the field relatively infrequently. It was a good little fighter, but it had marked limitations, and its technology, like its hyperdrive and shielding, was surpassed by future generations. As for the TIE Advance X1, there was a time before the Death Star that this was thought to be the next big thing in TIE fighters, that while it may not fully replace the tens of thousands of TIE line fighters out there, this could be the special elite squadron version. And to be fair, Darth Vader has proved itself very sturdy at the Battle of the Death Star. But its technology, while more advanced than the V1's, was soon eclipsed by the Defender we were just talking about. This had stronger shields, more cannon, and it had a hyperdrive that was twice as good. And while it was more expensive than the X1 itself was still a lot more expensive, so it was almost an in for a penny, in for a pound. Not to mention this could carry heavier ordnance, torpedoes, or missiles as well. So in most every way, this was a better starfighter compared to the TIE Advanced. Despite what some advanced pilots might have said, Defender pilots knew they had the best ship in the fleet, except for, like I said, the original production facility, development facility, was extensively damaged in one BBY, and funding was cut in favor of the Death Star. But then the Death Star was cut from reality in 0 BBY, hence why we go to the 0 ABY era, and it was decided maybe we should restart Defender production. Now, after the Death Star, Planet 73 would ramp up production of the X1, so we do see more squadrons flying these before Hoth and even after. In fact, a couple were seen at the Empire Day celebrations around that time. So they immediately did start these up. It seems like the X1 was picked over the V1 or the Avenger there, but it was a bit of a stopgap because they just needed something, because by now they could no longer deny the rebel threat. Finally, by 2 ABY, the TIE Defender facility was back up and running at Lothal, or maybe it had been transported elsewhere. The Empire never really indicated. Surprise, surprise. And the next batch were done. The original prototypes of these were known as the X7, code name just to kind of hide things. But after they kind of rebuilt the construction of the hyperdrive, again, that was the key feature for this, was the compact high-speed hyperdrive. They actually had a few of these available by the time of the Battle of Hoth, and it's speculated that a few of them might have seen some field deployment there just to give them some testing. Would not be until after Hoth and 3 ABY that they would ramp up TIE Defender production, but because of internal sabotage and corruption in the Empire, traitors like Admiral Zarin, it was slower than it needed to have been and a little bit compromised. Nevertheless, they did look extensively at making this the new fighter, and they would crank out about 10,000 TIE Defenders. But then again, the Empire, being brilliant as they were, decided to pour money into another Death Star, and this one was going to be even bigger and better, read more expensive than the last, meaning that yet again both the TIE Advance and TIE Defender programs were short-funded to make way for a big space ball. And as we all know, balls suck up all the funding. That's why only 10,000 of these were built, and probably even fewer of the Advance. At the same time, the Rebels are getting new and better fighters. The B-Wing is probably the most important one, but they're getting more advanced versions of the X-Wing, more A-Wings, which are, faster and really outstripping the regular TIE line fighter. They do need something because this is a space theater. Well, they decided to kind of go back to basics. Pushed for by the Admiralty and approved by Vader and Palpatine himself, a crash program was set about to replace the TIE LN with the trusty but still very good TIE Interceptor. And if it had gone to completion, it would have been nearly 100%, well over 50. As it happens in 4 ABY by the time of Endor, about 20% of the fleet had been switched over from the LN to the Interceptor. So they were there in numbers, and they proved very good. Again, and there's a reason that Defender pilots were taken from veterans of these. It is a good fighter in the hands of a skilled pilot. But no shields, no life support, limited of any ordnance carriage, although up to 6 lasers, and very good speed, although of course things like the Defender were even faster. But this was a threat to the X-Wing. It definitely outclassed the Y-Wing, and it gave the A-Wing a run for its money, literally speaking. As far as the B-Wing, it was its own craft. It was more of a light bomber, kind of more like the TIE Avenger, quite frankly. Problems and all. So this was the final kind of major push in the Imperial Starfighter Corps, and then they blew their second ball, lost the Emperor, lost Vader, and now the Empire is fighting a defensive war, which meant production again kind of reverted back to the standard TIE fighter, although they did keep making interceptors and bombers, but the idea of completely switching out the fleet, it had to be put on hold. Over the next year, 18 months, the Empire is fighting a defensive war, so if you were in a squadron and were lucky enough to have already received one of the more advanced TIE fighters, great. But if you were newly coming in, you were getting less training, and you were getting an unshielded craft. So by the end of the Galactic Civil War, there were just a handful of TIE Advance or TIE Defenders to be had. They were highly prized, and some of them would survive. But then you get into the Warlord period afterwards. That back was finally broken in 5 ABY. Different sections split off, and that's when the cheap maintenance cost and low requirements of the TIE fighter became apparent for these little warlords that had limited resources. Things like the TIE Advance and TIE Defender, they were just too resource intensive, too maintenance costly for any of these little petty men to operate. However, they were kind of held up as a mythical era from Sienar Systems and would inspire the next generation of TIEs being built in the unknown regions for the next generation. Quick headcanon. Okay, there's a scattered empire, Thrawn comes back, he organizes it, you have the Imperial Remnant, there's no First Order, there's no Kylo Ren, although we can have Jason Solo if you like, that's fine, I don't mind the tragedy going on. Anyway, let's pick it up and talk about fighters, because they do kind of carry along into our two advanced versions here, beginning with the TIE VN, the TIE Vendetta, aka the TIE TIE Silencer. You can tell I'm getting tired too. This was the first really advanced TIE to come out since the fall of the Empire. To be fair, they would put limited shield generation on their standard TIE FO, and even the TIE SF would have limited hyperdrive, but this is really the worthy successor to the TIE Defender, and you see some kind of resemblance in some ways to the old TIE Avenger, and the wings and just kind of the large canopy and main body. And this was the first one to really break it and have a Class 1 hyperdrive. It also had some, not exactly cloaking technology, but stealth systems, kind of silent running systems. And it was designed to be a light bomber or heavy space superiority fighter with 4 LS 9.6 cannon and 2 LS 7.5 heavy cannon down here, and the wings, or the strut I should say, had, what they say in there, ordnance launchers. And there were even ideas to have underslung missile pods, kind of reminiscent again of the Avenger, although in a space superiority role you wouldn't have those. But it did have 2 ordnance concussion missiles, proton torpedoes, mag pulse missiles, what have you. And it had its own life support built in and all that. I think it connects in very well to the Defender and Avenger, and is a neat design, and it's quite large too. It's like 17 meters long, although it's quite thin top down, although it's decently wide. It's definitely a large but capable fighter, and while they only made it to the prototype stage with these, there were plans, kind of like the X1 before it, to put these into mass production and give them to elite squadrons. But of course, this resurgence was short-lived. It was kind of like Napoleon's return. In a similar vein, and next up, we have what is probably a good successor to the TIE Interceptor, because of its ball canopy and the wing-mounted ordnance and everything else. This is the TIE WI, the TIE Whisper. It also has a Class 1 hyperdrive, and it's even more compact, just fitting in here. It has shield generators. It has 2 heavy laser cannon here and 4 medium here, presumably the same as the TIE Silencer. And kind of borrowing from the old TIE Special Forces, it has a rotating light laser turret down here for rear defense. Again, kind of like the TIE Avenger, but unlike the TIE SF, it just has a crew of 1 as far as we know. This one has good shielding and good armor. I would say it seems like the Silencer is a little more durable, a little more robust for long range. This is more of a fast interceptor. Maybe not quite as strong in the shielding and armor department. And it's a little bit shorter too, at about 15 meters, so still pretty good length on it though. The TIE Silencer was one of the fastest TIEs ever made at over 150 megalights and capable of hitting 1800 kph in atmosphere. That's actually comparable to real world fighters. And TIE Whisper, because it's just a little smaller, a little less powerful engines, it's about 140 megalights, so still faster than what we've seen before. And in atmosphere, it's about 1600, so just a little bit slower. but again, it was designed for a slightly different role. Neither of these would hit mass production because the whole Imperial resurgence would be brief. Thank goodness, because that last film. But anyway, at least I like the ship from the last film here pretty well. What do you think? But I wanted to bring these out because they do connect in well with our new ties. Sorry if the tripod mount wasn't great in this video. My one I've used for a long time decided to break on me just getting into it, so I had to kind of Frankenstein a mount together. I've got a replacement order, but it won't be until a couple of days. Anywho, here they are. I've seen some, frankly, legitimate complaints that maybe sometimes these aren't in the right scale. For example, the TIE Avenger is maybe an inch too short. I mean, it's over 6 inches, but if you're doing 1/72 scale, and if the current Disney canon is to believe, it should be about 7 inches long. I get that. Not everything can be exact. Now keep in mind, Star Wars has always played pretty fast and loose with any kind of tech specs. I mean, Star Trek's more technically oriented, and even they're hard to pin down on their ships. But I think where Jazzwares gets it right is, even if they don't get the exact scale down, they understand that, like, the TIE Striker should be longer than the Interceptor. The Interceptor should be shorter compared to the Avenger. The V1 is tiny. And the fact that the silencer is a little bit longer than the Whisper, and both are longer than the Avenger. So they get that right. Like, that one's longer, shorter, even if the exact details aren't. So I appreciate that. They scale very well. Now that said, you get one like the Scimitar, or for that matter, like the Millennium Falcon. This should be about double the length of the Avenger. And that's just not realistic. Not for this price and scale. So it's bigger. It gives you that idea. It's just not near enough bigger, but they know that. But I hope they never try to do things like the Corellian Corvette or Gazanti Cruiser or something. Stick to the nominally 1/72 scale. Within, 10%, 15% will be good. If you ever want to do larger Star Destroyer stuff, make them their own class, their own scale. And actually it'd be kind of cool, instead of having micro figures for those, have micro starfighters. That'd be kind of cool. Like a little half-inch X-Wing to come with a Mon Cal cruiser. But anyway, I digress. Just having fun here, hanging out, guys. Let's end with a few real-world notes. The TIE Interceptor in Return of the Jedi, which is when we first see it, different VFX shots, we see it firing either from the ball or the wingtips. Of course, in video games, it typically just has the 4 lasers, but to kind of gel with what's seen on screen, we can just say that some might have 6, but not all, and the reason why is, energy supply. As far as the TIE Avenger from Andor, I think it's really neat that they built a full-size prop model, and not just an exterior, but the interior set was in here too. So I hope one day they actually tell us the size of the prop, and then we'll really be able to know for 100% sure what the dimensions should be. They had, of course, a full-size X-Wing in Empire Strikes Back, and that really helped us kind of dial into the size of the X-Wing itself. Hint, Disney's wrong, they've made it too big. The creators of the Avenger attribute, as far as inspiration, the TIE Whisper, but I think it's very clear they meant to say TIE Silencer. Those two definitely look more alike. Speaking of inspirations, this TIE Defender is technically the TIE Elite from the new canon, just because it's a little bit longer. The original TIE Defender from Rebels, first seen before the Elite, was just a little bit shorter, and the wings were a little bit more truncated. But from the video game, the struts, the pylons that connecting them were longer and more spider-like. So I think this more compacted design works better, quite frankly. Although I still never understood why they did not have the TIE Advanced X1 in the original TIE Fighter game. But yeah, there you have it. As far as the Striker, I think it's neat that we have an atmospheric TIE. I don't know what it is about Rogue One where we saw these, but all the spaceships in that, at least, smaller fighters and shuttles, had a very elongated appearance. The U-wing, the shuttle that Krennic used, very long wings. It's kind of fun to identify them, but I think they look cool, and they fit in very well. But yeah, let me know what you think. I just wanted to have some fun here tonight. As always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe, and anything else. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.